the regulator of value. The utility of an article is one thing. Its exchangeable value is another. And the cost of its production is still another. But the amount of labor expended in production, though not the measure, is, in the long run, the regulator of value. For every new invention which abridges labor, and enables an individual or company to offer an increased supply of valuable articles in the market, brings with it an increase of competition. 4. Supposing that $1 constitutes a fair day's wages, and that one man by a certain process can produce an article valued in the market at $1 in half a day's labor, other men will take advantage of the same process, and undersell the first man, in order to get possession of the market. Thus, by the effect of competition, the price of the article will probably be ultimately reduced to 50 cents. Labor is the true regulator of value. For every laboring man who comes into competition with others increases the supply of the products of labor, and thus diminishes their value. While at the same time, and because he is a living man, he increases the demand for those products to precisely the same extent, and thus restores the balance, for the laborer must be housed, clothed and subsisted by the products of his labor. Thus the addition of a laboring man, or of any number of laboring men, to the mass of producers, ought to have no effect either upon the price of labor, or upon that of commodities. Since, if the laborer by his presence increases the productive power, he at the same time increases the demand for consumption. We know that things do not always fall out thus in practice. But the irregularity is explained by the fact that the laborer, who ought himself to have the produce of his labor, or its equivalent in exchange, has, by the present false organization of credit, his wages abstracted from him. Want and overproduction arise sometimes from mistakes in the direction of labor, but generally from that false organization of credit which now obtains throughout the civilized world. There is a market price of commodities, depending on supply and demand, and a natural price, depending on the cost of production. And the market price is in a state of continual oscillation, being sometimes above, and sometimes below, the natural price, but in the long run, the average of a series of years being taken, it coincides with it. It is probable that, under a true organization of credit, the natural price and market price would coincide at every moment. Under the present system, there are no articles whose market and natural prices coincide so nearly and so constantly as those of the precious metals. And it is for this reason that they have been adopted by the various nations as standards of value. When Adam Smith and Malthus 6 say that labor is a measure of value, they speak, not of the labor which an article cost, or ought to have cost, in its production, but of the quantity of labor which the article may purchase or command. It is very well, for those who mistake the philosophy of speculation on human misfortune and necessities for social science, to assume for measure of value the amount of labor which different commodities can command. Considered from this point of view, the price of commodities is regulated, not in the labor expended in their production, but by the distress and want of the laboring class. There is no device of the political economist so infernal as the one which ranks labor as a commodity, varying in value according to supply and demand. Neither is there any device so unphilosophical. Since the ratio of the supply of labor to the demand for it is unvarying, for every producer is also a consumer, and rightfully, to the precise extent of the amount of his products. The laborer who saves up his wages being, so far as society is concerned, and in the long run, a consumer of those wages. The supply and demand for labor is virtually unvarying. And its price ought, therefore, to be constant. Labor is said to be value, not because it is itself merchandise, but because of the values it contains, as it were, in solution, or, to use the correct metaphysical term, in potentia. The value of labor is a figurative expression, and a fiction, like the productiveness of capital. Labor, like liberty, love, ambition, genius, is something vague and indeterminate in its nature, and is rendered definite by its object only. Misdirected labor produces no value. Labor is said to be valuable, not because it can itself be valued, but because the products of labor may be truly valuable. When we say, John's labor is worth $1 a day, it is as though we said, the daily product of John's labor is worth $1. To speak of labor as merchandise is treason. For such speech denies the true dignity of man, who is the king of the earth. Where labor is merchandise in fact not by a mere inaccuracy of language, there man is merchandise also, whether it be in England or South Carolina.